They fired me for putting the company at risk. Cole said it so calmly, as if 9 years of protecting Vigilant Core meant nothing. One accusation, manufactured in a conference room full of people too scared to question him. And suddenly, I was the villain. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I walked out under the fluorescent lights knowing something he didn't. The truth always leaves a trail, and I documented every step. What came next wasn't rage, it was precision, and it would cost them far more than their lies. If you've ever been blindsided at work, tell me below, and stay. There's more power in this story than you think. For 9 years, I was the person everyone forgot until something broke. That was the rhythm of my life at Vigilant Core. Quiet, constant, invisible labor that kept our clients safe while executives collected applause for systems they didn't even understand. I didn't mind the silence. I liked being the one they called at 1 a.m. when a detection model misfired, or when a client's data set threatened to corrupt an entire threat mapping pipeline. I liked the feeling of stepping into chaos and restoring order before anyone outside the war room ever knew what happened. That was the life I built, and for a long time it felt enough. My days began with the Seattle rain tapping against the windows of our waterfront office and ended with the shimmering lights of the harbor reflecting off my monitors as I tightened and retuned our models for the next spike in cyber traffic. People often assume cybersecurity is glamorous, that it's neon lights and red alerts and high-speed chases. In reality, it's routine, patience, and intuition. It's knowing your system the way a mechanic knows the hum of an engine, hearing the faintest tremor, and knowing exactly where the failure sits. That was my gift. I'd built our predictive threat engine from scratch in my own time, long before Vigilant Core realized how much they depended on it. Of course, back then, I didn't call it leverage. I just called it pride. My coworkers came and went with the speed of a rotating door, especially once the new restructuring team arrived. New faces with shiny resumes and louder voices. But I stayed because someone had to maintain the bones of the place. Someone had to make sure we didn't collapse under the weight of our own ambitions. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was work that mattered. And in the world of cybersecurity, that meant everything. But the deeper truth is something I never said out loud. I felt tethered to that company. I'd poured too many nights, too many solutions, too many wins into its foundations to imagine life anywhere else. When I walked the hallways, people nodded politely, sometimes gratefully, but they never really saw me. Not the way they saw the new hires with innovation printed on their job descriptions. My work simply existed, expected to function like oxygen, unnoticed until it disappeared. Think that's why I ignored the early signs. The sudden shift in tone when Cole Remington joined as the new VP of Operations. The way he'd hover too long behind my chair, scanning my screens like he was searching for something to blame. The private Slack threads he wasn't supposed to be in. I chalked it up to new management nerves, the kind of turbulence that always follows executive reshuffling. I didn't realize then that he'd already marked me as expendable. I didn't realize how many quiet battles he was fighting behind closed doors, trying to reshape the company in his image. And I certainly didn't realize that one day soon, all the years I'd given, all the nights I'd surrendered, all the systems I'd protected, would be reduced to a single sentence that would end everything. The day everything snapped didn't look dramatic at first. No alarms blaring, no system failures, no frantic calls from a client. Just a gray Tuesday where the rain clung to the windows, like a warning I didn't know how to read. I was reviewing routine traffic anomalies when I felt a shadow fall over my desk. Cole Remington stood there, arms crossed, wearing that polished half-smile he used whenever he wanted to pretend he wasn't about to cause trouble. "Amaya, can we talk privately?" He didn't wait for me to answer. He turned and walked straight into the conference room, glass walls exposed to the entire floor. I followed, confused. He closed the door behind me. His tone was clipped, almost rehearsed. "There's been an incident," he began. I blinked. "What incident?" He rotated a tablet toward me. A single alert blinked on screen, one of our lower-level threat indicators. It wasn't even critical. "This was flagged at 3 a.m., he said. "Not by our system, by a client." That didn't make sense, and he knew it. I leaned forward. "Cole, that alert came from an automated mirror. It wasn't a breach. I handled it. You can check the logs." He tapped the tablet again, zooming into a snippet of code stripped of context. "This script is yours," he said, and according to the logs, it introduced instability to the detection chain. My stomach tightened. He was showing me my own preventative script, one designed to intercept false positives before clients panicked. "That script prevents instability," I said slowly. "It catches misfires before they escalate. You would know that if—" "If what?" he cut in. "If I understood your unconventional methods?" The word hit like a slap, not because it was new, but because of how deliberately he said it, like he'd been storing it for this moment. I reached for the tablet. "Let me pull the full log. There's context missing here." But he drew it back. "We've already completed our internal review," he said. "The conclusion is clear." He paused just long enough to savor the next words. "Your actions created a breach risk, a serious one." I felt heat rise in my face. "That's not true. I prevented a breach. Cole, you're twisting—" "Stop," he said, voice sharpening. "Blaming the process won't fix this." I stared at him, stunned. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He was framing me. For what, I couldn't yet tell. Maybe he needed a scapegoat for his automation rollout. Maybe he wanted someone out of the way. Maybe he simply didn't like how essential I'd become. But whatever his motive, it was unfolding with cold precision. "I need you to understand something," he continued. "This isn't personal. It's about accountability." The word accountability, coming from a man who couldn't interpret a basic log, felt like a cruel joke. I tried one last time. "Cole, check my full documentation. Check the chain of custody. Check the timestamp integrity. You're missing critical "We're done," he said firmly. "We'll be discussing next steps shortly." He unlocked the door, signaling the conversation was over. As I stepped out, I noticed the way people avoided eye contact, the way whispers sparked beneath lowered voices. Someone had already spread the story. Someone wanted it to spread. And in that moment, with the rain pounding harder against the glass, I realized the truth. This wasn't about a script. It wasn't about a risk. This was about power, and I had just been marked as the next casualty. I didn't even make it back to my desk before the message hit my screen. "All hands meeting in the main conference room, 5 minutes." It was unusual, but not alarming, until I walked into the room and felt every pair of eyes snap toward me, then just as quickly snap away. Cole stood at the front, hands clasped, posture stiff, with the kind of manufactured authority that always made people uneasy. I slipped into a chair near the back, still trying to convince myself this was all a misunderstanding that could be sorted out with facts, logs, and clarity. But the moment Cole cleared his throat, I knew facts weren't invited. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, projecting his voice like he was announcing an award instead of a verdict. "As part of our internal review, we have identified actions that compromised our detection chain and created significant exposure risk." My stomach dropped. He wouldn't, except he was. He continued, eyes scanning the room with solemn gravity he hadn't earned. "Effective immediately, we are taking corrective steps to ensure the safety and stability of our platform." Then he looked straight at me. Direct, cold, calculated. "Amaya, please stand." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed. I rose slowly, pulse hammering in my ears. "You knowingly deployed unauthorized modifications?" he declared, as if reading from a script written long before any so-called incident. "Your decisions introduced unacceptable vulnerabilities. Due to the severity of this breach risk—" He paused, letting the room stew in the tension. "Your employment with Vigilant Core is terminated, effective immediately." A few gasps. Some stiffened spines, mostly silence. Heavy, suffocating. For a moment the world blurred at the edges. Not from shame requires guilt, but from the sheer audacity of watching a lie delivered with such confidence that people were already nodding along. "Security will escort you out," he finished. A young guard, barely old enough to rent a car, stepped forward awkwardly, his eyes apologizing even if his mouth didn't dare. I didn't look at Cole. He had already won the performance, but I looked at the others. The engineers I'd stayed up nights with during critical patches, the analysts I'd guided through crisis after crisis, the people whose systems I had held together without asking for recognition. Most looked away. A few looked afraid. One or two looked ashamed, for me or for themselves, I couldn't tell. I picked up my bag, moving slowly, deliberately. I wouldn't give them the spectacle he clearly wanted. As we walked down the hallway, the silence clung to me like fog. People peered over their monitors, then quickly pretended to type. The same people who had trusted me with their outages, their failures, their panic, now pretending they'd never needed me at all. When the elevator doors closed, the guard muttered, "I'm sorry." "Not your fault," I said, the words steady even as something sharper curled behind them. Because as the elevator descended floor by floor, something inside me shifted. Not rage. Rage is loud. This was quieter, darker, precise. They thought stripping my badge would strip my power. They thought humiliation would make me vanish. They thought escorting me out meant the story was over. But as the doors opened into the lobby and cold air brushed my face, I felt a chilling clarity settle in. They had no idea what I truly built, no idea what they depended on, and no idea what was coming next. The air outside felt colder than it should have, like the city itself was watching what had just happened. I stood there for a moment with my badge still warm in my hand, stripped of its authority but not of its truth. Then I slipped it into my pocket and walked toward the only person who would understand what came next. Sienna Gray didn't ask questions when I called. She simply said, "My office, now." She was the only attorney I trusted, not because she was my friend, but because she had a talent for seeing patterns the way I did. When I arrived, she was already standing with her arms folded, eyebrows raised. "You look like someone set fire to your house and then asked you to apologize for the smoke," she said. "What happened?" I explained everything. Cole's accusation, the fabricated context, the public firing. Her expression sharpened with every detail. "They framed you," she said plainly, "and sloppily." I swallowed hard. "Sienna, they think I created a breach risk. They think I'm the reason the system flagged an alert." She shook her head. "No, they want you to be the reason. There's a difference." She motioned for me to sit, then said, "Tell me exactly what you were working on." I opened my laptop, my hands steady despite the adrenaline threading through my veins. I navigated to a locked repository, one Vigilant Core had no access to, because it was never theirs to begin with. "This is my engine," I said quietly. "The real one, the one that powers half of their detection chain." Sienna leaned forward. "You built all this?" "Years ago," I replied. "On my time, on my hardware. I let them integrate some components because they needed better detection, and I didn't want clients getting hurt by sloppy systems." She scanned the screen, then froze. "Amaya, this isn't just code. These are signed commits, time-stamped, cryptographically linked." I nodded. Everything I ever pushed into their environment can be traced back to repositories I independently maintain. I logged every derivative piece, every adaptation, every script. Her eyes lit with something like admiration and fear intertwined. "You documented everything," she murmured. "Every bit. Always." Her fingers hovered above the trackpad. "And this engine, they've built their entire operational workflow around it?" "More than they realize," I said. "The automation tools Cole is pushing, they're stitched into my predictive models. The client validation protocols, my signatures, the anomaly classification rules, they collapse without the engine feeding them." Sienna sat back slowly. "So what he called a breach risk was actually a preventative script," I finished. "A safeguard, one he didn't bother to understand before turning it into ammunition." She let out a breathless laugh, short and sharp. "He hung his entire accusation on the one system protecting them. And without me maintaining it," I added, "the whole architecture becomes fragile." A silence settled between us, calm, heavy, electric. "Amaya," she said finally, "do you understand what you have here?" I did. I understood it with brutal clarity. For years, I built systems that kept Vigilant Core stable. I wasn't just an engineer in the shadows. I was the backbone they forgot was holding them upright. And Cole had just broken that backbone, proudly, publicly. "They thought firing me was the end," I said softly. "But they don't know the dependencies. They don't know the integration paths. They don't know how much of their detection relies on my personal engine." "And now," Sienna said, leaning forward, "every unauthorized use of your code is measurable, verifiable, legally actionable." I closed the laptop. They wanted accountability? They're about to get more of it than they ever imagined. As I stood to leave, she placed a hand on my arm. "Amaya, before we do anything, I need to know what you want." I didn't hesitate. "I want the truth to land exactly where the lies started." And for the first time since the elevator doors closed behind me, I felt something solid in my chest. Not anger, not grief, leverage, the kind they never saw coming. The first 48 hours after my firing were strangely quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind of quiet where you can feel movement beneath the surface, pressure building toward something inevitable. Sienna told me to sit tight while she reviewed every log, every commit, every chain of custody trail I'd kept. But sitting still didn't mean disconnecting. I knew Vigilant Core too well. I knew how they operated when they thought they were untouchable, when they believed a single person, me, was easily replaceable. So I opened my private monitoring dashboard, the one they never knew existed because it ran on my own infrastructure, separate from anything they controlled. The telemetry was still flowing, not because I intended to weaponize it, but because I'd built the habit of keeping my systems clean, functional, and accountable. The first red flag appeared the morning after my firing. A junior engineer whose name I barely recognized had pushed a commit directly into the live detection chain, something I never allowed without 3 layers of validation. My dashboard caught the result instantly, a spike in false positives. Nothing catastrophic yet, just enough to distort threat scores and confuse lower-tier analysts. Then by noon, the second spike hit. Their new automation workflow, Cole's pet project, had begun rewriting segments of my predictive rules. It was like watching someone try to repair a clock by smashing it with a wrench. The system wasn't built to be clean or modern in the way Cole fantasized. It was built to be resilient, adaptive, and painfully precise. Every rule interacted with 20 others. Every threshold had been tested against thousands of edge cases. You couldn't just swap lines of logic like swapping batteries. And yet, that's exactly what they tried. By the end of day 2, client alerts had doubled. By day 3, their anomaly classifier entered a loop it couldn't exit, mislabeling harmless activity as medium-risk threats. On day 4, an enterprise client filed a ticket complaining their internal traffic was being treated like an intrusion attempt. I could almost see the engineers scrambling, tripping over each other to diagnose the problem, but the logs told the story. They had no idea what they were looking at. By day 5, the system load began to balloon. Resource allocation patterns were wildly off. The models were running unnecessary cycles. The engine, my engine, was being starved, overfed, rewritten, and throttled all at once. I watched it the way a surgeon might watch an imposter perform. A procedure with shaking hands. It wasn't malicious. It was simply inevitable. Remove the architect and the building begins to sag. Remove the foundation and it starts to crumble. Remove the one person who understood the rope bridge you were walking on, and the planks start snapping beneath your feet. The real collapse began the following Monday. Vigilant Core processed its weekly validation cycle, a routine task, normally invisible, handled by a series of interconnected scripts designed to cleanse and calibrate client datasets. Without my oversight, those scripts turned into a minefield. One minor adjustment introduced by Cole's team severed a dependency chain. Another deleted a fallback rule. The third triggered a recursive validation loop that escalated resource consumption by the minute. My dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Memory spikes, delayed responses, threat maps freezing mid-render. Then came the silence, the kind of silence you only see when a system stops responding entirely. Their entire validation workflow hung suspended, not broken, not crashed, suspended, waiting for logic that didn't exist anymore. I took a breath, leaned back, and let the moment wash over me. Not with joy, not with vengeance, with recognition. They were finally experiencing what I'd protected them from for years. And they hadn't even reached the worst part yet, because the deeper their problems ran, the more inevitable it became that someone, whether engineer, client, or board member, would finally ask the question Cole had worked so hard to bury. What exactly did Amaya build, and why does nothing work without it? By the time Sienna called, Vigilant Core was already knee-deep in the chaos they insisted on creating. I could hear it in her voice before she even spoke the words. "It's time," she said. "They've crossed every line necessary." She had spent the past week studying the documentation I provided, my signed commits, the cryptographic timestamps, the independent repository histories, the chain of custody logs that proved exactly where every line of my engine originated, and now she had assembled it into something sharp enough to cut through every lie Cole had constructed. "The demand letter goes out at 9, she said. "Full forensic breakdown, unauthorized usage, licensing violations, derivative work misuse, and tampering with a protected tool." "Good," I replied. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cheer. I simply felt the kind of steadiness you only get when the truth has finally caught up with the people who ran from it. At exactly 9:00 a.m. Pacific time, Sienna hit send. And because Vigilant Core loved theatrics, the letter couldn't have landed at a better moment. Right in the middle of a scheduled board strategy meeting. I didn't need access to their inboxes to know how it unfolded. I could picture every detail. A board member glancing at her tablet, pausing mid-sentence. Another leaning in to see what could possibly shock someone so composed. Someone else muttering, "You need to read this." Then the slow, choking realization spreading across the executive table as they understood what the letter contained. Proof, not assumptions, not accusations. Proof that the system they were trying to fix by deleting me was built on code they didn't own, couldn't replicate, and had modified without any legal right. Proof that they'd publicly accused me of causing the very instability they introduced. Proof that Cole had pushed for internal changes without vetting dependencies he didn't even understand. Proof that firing me wasn't just reckless, it was financially catastrophic. 3 minutes after the letter was delivered, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Vigilant Core's number. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Amaya," a voice said, tight with forced politeness. It was the interim legal counsel, someone I barely knew. "We'd like to discuss the letter your attorney sent. It contains allegations we find concerning." "They're not allegations," I said. "They're facts." A beat of silence. "We believe this situation can be resolved amicably." There it was, the pivot from arrogance to panic. "You should direct any communication to Sienna," I replied. "She'll handle it." "Amaya, please, this is serious." "It became serious," I said, "the moment you let Cole weaponize a false narrative and fire me in front of the entire company." I ended the call. 2 minutes later, another came in, this time from Cole himself. I declined it. He tried again, declined, then a third time. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear his voice to know exactly what he'd say. Excuses wrapped as explanations, blame disguised as concern, and desperation hidden behind a strained attempt at authority. But none of that mattered anymore. The letter was out. The evidence was in their hands. And for the first time since the day he stood over my desk, Cole was the one without control. By Wednesday morning, the fallout had finally reached the surface. What began as quiet instability inside Vigilant Core's systems erupted into a full-blown crisis once the board realized the demand letter wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. Everything they'd ignored, everything Cole had fabricated, everything they assumed they could bury under corporate language and intimidation, was now sitting in front of them in black and white legal documentation. I didn't need insider access to track the chaos. The signs were everywhere. Client portals timing out, new automation tools malfunctioning, error logs ballooning, and then, An alert hit my private dashboard, showing that their validation cycle had failed again, only this time it triggered a cascade that forced them into emergency shutdown mode. That was the moment I knew the board would turn on coal. Predictably, they did. At 8:14 a.m., a notification popped up on LinkedIn, Leadership Update at Vigilant Core. A carefully worded post announcing Cole's departure to pursue new opportunities, published in the kind of corporate tone that only appears when someone has been fired fast and quietly. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered the conference room, the humiliation, the way he weaponized ignorance and expected me to fold under it. Choices have consequences, and his had just arrived with a stamped envelope and my attorney's signature. By the time Vigilant Core's board requested a formal meeting with Sienna, the tone had changed entirely. They weren't arguing, threatening, or dismissing. They were pleading. Sienna forwarded me their tentative settlement terms, initially defensive, then increasingly generous as the hours passed. Back pay for unauthorized use, compensation for derivative integrations, damages for tampering with protected intellectual property, licensing fees they should have paid years ago, and finally, a desperate add-on, ongoing commercial licensing at a rate that made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't revenge, it was valuation, the first time they had ever bothered to calculate what my work was truly worth. That afternoon, they asked for a direct conversation, not with Sienna, with me. I agreed, not out of obligation, but because some endings deserve to be witnessed firsthand. The call was a collection of stiff suits, anxious faces, and eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. The interim CEO spoke first. Amaya, we'd like to acknowledge the mishandling of your departure. Mishandling, that word nearly made me laugh. He continued carefully. We did not fully understand how critical your engine was to our infrastructure. We would like to make this right. Making it right, I said evenly, starts with accepting the facts, all of them. And for once, they didn't argue, they didn't deflect, they didn't protect Cole. They accepted every term. The final settlement number was staggering, enough to make even seasoned executives swallow hard. But they signed it, because they knew they had no defense, and because the system instability had already cost them far more than what they owed me. When the meeting ended, the screen went dark and silence filled the room. I let myself breathe, not in triumph, not in spite, just in relief. They thought firing me would erase me. Instead, it forced them to see me, and the truth, when finally spoken, landed harder than any revenge I could have planned. In the weeks that followed, the noise around Vigilant Core slowly faded into the background, like a storm passing in the distance. I didn't wait around to see how they rebuilt themselves. That was no longer my burden to carry. Instead, I moved forward with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I rented a small workspace overlooking the sound, nothing fancy, just a desk, a window, and enough room to breathe without someone hovering over my shoulder pretending to understand my work. It was there I began shaping the next chapter of my life. What started as a defensive necessity transformed into a business I never expected to build. Companies reached out, some curious, some desperate, some quietly terrified after hearing what happened at Vigilant Core. They wanted guidance, licensing, audits, protection. They wanted someone who actually understood the systems they depended on. I chose carefully. I wasn't interested in rescuing companies from their own negligence unless they were willing to treat their engineers with the respect I had been denied for so long. My engine evolved too. I refined it, hardened it, expanded what it could do, not out of bitterness but out of pride, the kind of pride that comes from building something valuable and finally being paid accordingly. And for the first time in my career, I worked on my own terms. No rushed approvals, no politicking, no executives pretending expertise they didn't possess. Just clean work, clean purpose, clean boundaries. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think back to the moment Cole called security on me. That humiliating walk to the elevator, the whispers, the pity, the fear. I used to replay it with anger. Now I replay it with gratitude. If he hadn't tried to erase me so ruthlessly, I might never have realized how much power I'd been handing over for free. One morning, months later, I passed Vigilant Core's tower on my way to a client meeting. A new logo hung over the building, proof of an acquisition that had swallowed the company whole. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sadness either. I felt distance, growth, freedom. That's when it hit me. They had taken my job, but in doing so, they had given me something far more valuable: my independence, my voice, my worth, and the chance to build a life where no one would ever again mistake my silence for weakness. I didn't win because they paid. I won because I walked away owning everything that mattered. When everything finally settled, I realized the real lesson wasn't about winning or proving someone wrong. It was about learning to stop shrinking myself to fit places that were never built to hold me. For so long, I believed staying quiet made me strong. I thought being the reliable one, the fixer, the person who never asked for credit, would somehow protect me. But life doesn't reward silence, it rewards clarity. The moment I stopped trying to be reasonable and instead stood firmly in the truth, the entire situation shifted. Not because I became ruthless, but because I stopped letting fear negotiate for me. It's strange how betrayal sharpens your vision. When someone pushes you out, you finally see what you've been holding up on your own. You see who depended on your effort, who relied on your knowledge, and who only valued you as long as you didn't ask for anything back. And sometimes the most painful truth is also the most freeing. You can outgrow a place long before you walk out its doors. Do I believe forgiveness has a place? Yes, sometimes forgiveness is how you stop carrying the weight of what someone did to you. But sometimes the more honest answer is this: silence, paired with evidence, boundaries, and a refusal to be erased, can be the sharpest knife, not to destroy, but to divide truth from lies. In today's working world, many people are exhausted, overlooked, or afraid of rocking the boat. My advice is simple: don't wait for someone else to validate your worth. Protect your work, know your agreements, speak up before you're drowning. And if you ever have to walk away, make sure you walk toward a future that respects you. How to get started today. Write down 3 boundaries you've avoided setting at work. Document 1 accomplishment you've downplayed. Identify 1 area where you've been settling and commit to changing it. Tell yourself out loud that you deserve better than bare minimum respect. If this spoke to you, tell me your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs a reminder of their strength, and subscribe for more stories that say what too many workplaces won't.